The Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway, completed in 1940 as a way to get commerce up and down the East Coast economically and safely, is much more than that. It links people and places together, exposes a unique way of life, and shares a history. From just north of Myrtle Beach to south of Hilton Head, South Carolina's Intracoastal Passage is 235 miles of natural creeks, sounds, rivers, and man-made channels. It's diverse, beautiful, and those who live and work along the waterway have stories to tell.
I live on an island you can only get to by boat. It's like being in the country, but 5 minutes from town.
In the northern part of the state, you're going to have to cut channel where there has never been one. You wind up blasting cypress swamps out of the water.
And you can look out and you see a little clump of trees out in the marsh. We figured that was an old mill site.
The phenomenal thing is how they got it off the barge and mounted. I mean, this is some heavy stuff. A boiler alone, one boiler, is 7,000 pounds.
This plantation was built on the Stono River. So the planters could jump on a boat and ride the tide, go through Wapu Cut, go to Charleston, and then turn around and ride the tide back. Life was based on the water, it wasn't based on roads.
I think that John Henry's interest and passion for birds came out of his own experience. He was a lifelong learner, and he was very proud of that.
Not in a hurry, there's not a lot of fast traffic, you're not worried about ocean currents. It's nice to take a leisurely, slow ride up and down the waterway.
Richard Porcher and Billy Judd are hunters. They're hunting down pre-Civil War history. Porcher, an author, and Judd, a mechanical artist, are researching for a book on the market preparation of Carolina rice. In 1860, South Carolina accounted for 95% of all rice production in the U.S.
The rice culture was probably the most important aspect of the low country that shaped the ecology, the culture, the economy. That with C. Allen Cotton, that is really what shaped the low country.
Today, the 150-year-old rice fields can be found in the Delta near Cape Romaine. Also left behind, but lost in most cases, are the remnants of the rice mills. Finding them takes some gas money and a lot of patience.
Would it be better to go in this one or that one?
You get on a boat, and you go down every creek and you see a little clump of cedar trees off in the marsh, pull out the boat and walk out. So there's no map showing anything really. You realize that was a low elevation and it could be the village site or an old mill site. One boiler and one flywheel. You want to break these branches so we can see better? Of the hundreds of mills, only 4 boilers left. This is one of them out here. So we got to use these 4 to get the dimensions and shape and construction of how they were put together. And from these 4 we'll be able to diagram the boiler system of an old rice mill, a steam-driven rice mill.
you can look at these pieces and put it back together in your mind, and that's basically what I try to do with the drawings, is get these components and put them back together so you have a whole picture of what's going on or what went on.
Back in their boat, the researchers go deeper into the delta to study a second pre-Civil War location. This time, the trail, if you can call it that, is even tougher.
This location is small now, but it was a little larger than this and higher. But over the years, erosion and the water table has come up. Just getting all that equipment in here was a phenomenal job to do. I don't understand how to do it.
How do you want to go? How do you want to go? How do you want to go? Take these chains and leave this place. Leave it far behind. I think I'll tell my soul.
A few miles north up the Intracoastal and down the Black River is Mansfield Plantation.
I think I'll tell my soul. Take these chains and leave this place. Leave it far behind.
Built in 1768, Mansfield has something valuable to Porcher and Judd, a standing rice mill chimney.
They started producing steam power for the threshing machines around 1830, 1840. So this is probably 1830, 1840. That's a rough date. But there were probably 100 of these mills and chimneys all through the Rice Kingdom, Georgia, North Carolina, South Carolina, but only 15 of them still stand. So from the 15 still standing, Billy and I are trying to put together how these whole systems, the whole steam system operated.
I wasn't there in 1800s, so that's one of the exciting things too, is trying to figure it out. Trying to figure out, and you think you got it figured out, and you go to another site and it just throws it all out the window because you got to start over.
Whoa, whoa, whoa. Take these chains and leave this place. Leave it far behind.
Right across from Charleston County's Isle of Palms is a small yet pretty well inhabited island that you can only get to by boat, Goat Island. Ashley Ulrich and her family of 5 have a house on Goat Island. It's a unique life that takes a little getting used to.
We have to get used to being on the water every day, and you have to not mind being sandy and salty and wet. Sometimes the boat's icy in the wintertime in the morning, so you have to watch your step when you're getting in and out. But for the most part, it's not bad living over here. It's worth it.
It's approaching 3 o'clock and time to pick up her son Michael from the school bus.
Most of the time, when I pick Michael up from the bus stop in the afternoons, he jumps behind the wheel first. You know, I kind of act like first mate and he's the captain.
To some, riding the last leg home in a small boat may be an imposition, but don't tell that to a 10-year-old boy.
It's not like Gilligan's Island. We do have electricity. We don't have cable, but you can use satellite. We have phone service. And we do use rainwater and collect our rainwater in cisterns under the house. We don't dilly-dally in the shower. It's in and out pretty quick. That's been tough for the kids to learn.
Goat Island is about 2.5 miles long and has 45 houses with maybe 25 year-round residents. It even has its own dirt road that runs behind the island, Buccaneer Road.
It's a great place to walk, take your dogs out for a run. The entire back half of the island is in a land trust, so you can't build on it. So it's great nature. Lots of deer, lots of raccoons and possums.
And goats. Don't forget about the goats. Charleston Harbor is the midway point for South Carolina's portion of the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway and home to the Army Corps of Engineers District Office that built and maintains the passage. The Corps' presence in Charleston since 1818 has added greatly to the history and lore of the Low Country. Under the direction of Secretary of War John C. Calhoun, the military engineers came to Charleston. They shored up the old forts of Fort Moultrie and Fort Johnson and built a new one, Fort Sumter, that was completed in the 1850s.
The nation was a fledgling nation and trying to get stood up on its own 2 feet. So they had to face not only international threats, whether it was from foreign countries, but also faced a very realistic threat from pirates going up and down the East Coast and the Caribbean. So they built a series of forts from New York all the way down to the southern tip of Florida in order to protect the intercoastal trade.
The idea was, at the time, you needed to have the forts so that their arcs of fire and an effective range of about 1 mile would intersect. And Fort Sumter becomes the center point between Forts Moultrie and Johnson. In the Civil War, Charleston was one of the very few Confederate ports that was able to fight off and was prepared to fight off a Union assault.
The Civil War left Charleston burned, battered, and poor. Charleston Harbor was wrecked. Without a cleared, deeper ship channel, the city would be denied the international trade it was accustomed to. The federal government needed to restart the Low Country's economic engine.
Immediately after the war, the Union commanders were really not interested in doing that much to help South Carolina, which they considered the cause of this conflict everybody had just been through. But interestingly enough, the commander along the eastern seaboard was a colonel by the name of Quincy Gilmore, and he had commanded the Union armies that had battered Charleston during the war itself. And when he became the chief of engineers for the eastern seaboard, he was instrumental in designing the project that became the Charleston Harbor project of the jetties.
Perhaps no event affected the development of the Low Country more than the construction of the jetties. Completed in 1895, the jetties revitalized Charleston, leading to unprecedented growth that still today makes Charleston one of the busiest ports on the East Coast.
It made a lot of sense back in the 1800s to try to create a navigation system, a transportation system, to get goods up and down the coastline economically. So as early as 1803, an idea was thrown out there to create an inland waterway. And by 1937, the federal government adopts the Rivers and Harbors Act, and entrust the Corps of Engineers with the requirement to design, construct, and then maintain the inland waterway up and down the coastline.
Jimmy Haddon is the Corps' project manager for the South Carolina portion of the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway. He's been with the Corps for 35 years and has overseen the waterway for the last 8.
From the North Carolina line all the way down to the South Carolina-Georgia line, the waterway's 235 miles long. Of that 235, the Charleston district mains to about 210.
Of the 210 miles, about 30 of those miles are man-made. Myrtle Beach's passage had to be dug out. That's why some locals call it the ditch.
Everywhere you go locally, you've got complicated construction problems to solve. You've got to figure how to dredge when places where the water's not that deep. What they did was build little dams and raise the water level, and then they could dredge the channel that they needed going south. Almost every way, the Corps just inches its way down dredging.
The waterway was completed in 1940, and now it's up to the Corps' district offices to maintain it. Keeping it deep enough and wide enough can be challenging in these cost-cutting times.
Obviously, funding is a major issue right now. Those are some of the things we're having problems with, is getting the funding on an annual basis enough to maintain it. It's been authorized at 90 feet wide and 12 feet deep, but we haven't actually dredged to that depth since the early 2000. Probably 1997 was one of the last sections where we did full dredging.
We today are in the transportation business.
Boss Smith has been operations manager for the Stevens Towing Company for over 20 years.
We move cargo of all types, commodities, steel, coal, wood chips, and then we use heavy machinery which is too heavy to go by railroad or road, just transformers, turbines, generators, that kind of stuff.
Smith says there's a problem with the way the federal government determines the amount of funds necessary to keep the waterway open to commercial traffic.
In the last 20 years, the waterway has changed because the federal government has stepped away from the maintenance responsibility. They've declared our waterway a low-use waterway, even though if you look at our waterway, it's probably the highest used waterway in the United States. We've got more docks, more boats, more activities happening out here every day. The problem we've got is the only activity that counts is commercial cargo tonnage.
Intracoastal Waterway fish.
The rise of recreational waterway use, which is a post-World War II phenomenon, has been explosive, and now, of course, is a great contributor to economic activity everywhere. But they still don't measure that, for example, when they're computing whether it's cost-efficient to dredge an intercoastal waterway.
In the engineer world, if you don't have commercial cargo tonnage, you don't have any volume to speak of.
The shallower the waterway gets, the less tonnage can be moved. The less tonnage moved, the less funding for the dredging necessary to keep the waterway from getting too shallow. It's a vicious cycle. But perhaps the Atlantic Intracoastal Waterway is a relic of the past. Interstate highways go not only north and south, but east and west. So maybe the waterway should follow the horse and buggy and the steam locomotive and slip quietly into the pages of history books.
If you look at the future of the waterway, I think it's extremely bright, and there's a bunch of reasons for that. Highway congestion is steadily increasing. We are a viable alternative to I-95. We are basically underutilized. We can move a tremendous volume of truckloads on the waterway with one barge.
Environmentally, there's a huge advantage shipping via barge. It takes about 100 trucks to ship what you can ship in one barge. So imagine all the emissions that you're reducing into the environment if you ship a load via barge instead of via trucks.
The issue is somebody has to invest in the waterway that we can keep this thing open.
What's the number?
Jimmy Haddon thinks regionalization is the best way to keep the waterway funded and ready for commercial traffic.
We're going to have to get all the states involved. The Congress and the Corps are going to really have to be committed to keeping this waterway open. And to do that, the Corps can get together with these other states and pull all the agencies together, look at this as a regional system, do an economic impact study on a regional basis. Then each state doesn't have to fight for money, and we can manage the whole system. We feel a little bit better if we're all in the interstate group like that.
A few miles south of Charleston is our next stop, Dixie Plantation.
We come out here, and it's a love of nature that I'm trying to instill in my students.
Professor Phil Dustin brings his biology classes out to Dixie a few times each semester.
I can teach them ecology in the classroom, but you can't experience it until you come out here. So we bring them out here, and they love it. I think that part of it makes Dixie unique.
Hey everybody, what I'd like to do is to space ourselves evenly out around the circumference of this tree. Now, just so we can sort of get an idea of the size of what we're talking about. Keep going. Out to here. 22 meters.
Dixie was a gift to the College of Charleston from photographer, artist, and conservationist John Henry Dick.
John Henry willed this to the college, fully realizing that we needed a facility where we could essentially practice conservation, study conservation, teach conservation, and demonstrate conservation.
So this is a lizardfish, very different. The fin placement is completely abdominal. So the pelvic fins are way back, the pectoral fins are way forward. No hard spines, everything's soft rayed. And the mandible looks big, but there's no projection of it.
Oh.
It's just big, but notice the premaxilla is up there, and this is the maxilla.
John Henry Dick traveled the world to document, photograph, and paint birds. He may be best remembered for his meticulous attention to detail.
His attention to detail was absolutely critical in enabling a future generation or a scholar or a bird watcher to understand exactly the nuances between the species or subspecies. I'm not an expert by any stretch of the imagination in ornithology or art for that matter, but one of the things I always appreciated about John Henry was every bird that he portrayed looked like it had a personality, you know, and because he paid attention to detail and to color, it made the birds come alive, I think, for everyone.
The other thing, notice we're walking underneath and there's no plant right here, but if you look up there, it's all leaves. They're all up there.
He wanted his legacy to live on, which is why he gave Dixie Plantation to the College of Charleston.
Look at the knots in them. See how it twists around? You get these.
And it is to be maintained in perpetuity as a place for young people who live here or who come here to college to be able to learn about the unique ecosystem of the Lowcountry.
Where else are you going to find something 300 years old to talk to?
The South Carolina Intracoastal Waterway is more than a way to get from border to border to accommodate a hurried life. It is a way of life, and worthy of a slow ride.